I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This week I'm speaking to Joff Curtoys, conservationist, ecologist and founder of Sloemotion Distillery. Saturday just gone saw the launch of National Hedgerow Day, an annual event launched by Joff to inspire people to undertake their own foraging missions to spot what's growing and living in their local hedgerows. Hedgerows are historically important, biodiverse and fascinating, as Joff explains. Here's Joff introducing himself and his business.
Well, I am the founder of Sloemotion Distillery. Started way back in 2002. And the business start. I'm an ecologist by training. Used to work for the RSPB for many years and studied ecology at university. But I started trying to help a farmer improve his land, his farm, for wildlife. And so we started doing lots of conservation measures all over the farm. One of the things that we did was stopped cutting the hedgerows annually, which we'd done in the past, to try and allow the hedges to grow out and produce more fruit. Fruit will only grow on second-year growth of shrubs. So by cutting the hedges every year, you get very little fruit production. So we put the hedges into a 3-year cutting rotation. And as a result, I had lots of fruit occurring all over the farm. And in particular, on this particular farm, lots of sloes started appearing. So whilst there were lots of hawthorn berries and blackberries and other fruit available for the wildlife, sloes are rarely eaten by anything else. So we thought, well, actually, we could start harvesting that as a crop. And that would fund and make some sloe gin and sell that. And that would fund the conservation work on the farm. So it was genuinely, the business came about as a complete sort of surprise reaction to some conservation work that we were doing.
That's interesting. So if you cut them in a 3-year rotation, does that have any effect at all on their health or their growth?
So inevitably it does, and it can be at times if they're particularly growing quite aggressively. It can, the cutting back can be quite aggressive, but ultimately it aids the health of the hedge. Overall, so and you cut it in rotation, so you don't cut all the hedges on the farm in 1 year. You cut a third of them or a fourth of them, whichever it is, and we left a lot of hedges to grow even more than that. So sometimes they went to a much longer rotation. But as long as you're sensitive with the management, you can manage that pretty well. And
it may sound like a very simple question, but I suspect it's a bit more complex. But what is a hedgerow?
That it depends on how long do you want the answer to be. I mean, hedgerows. You really struck on an area of interest in mine, the social history of hedgerows, because hedgerows are utterly man-made. They are composed of natural things, plants, inevitably, but hedgerows. You don't see hedgerows really anywhere else in the world. Hedgerows here are a truly man-made thing. And if you went back to the 15th, 16th, 17th century, hedgerows were seen as were incredibly divisive. They were there for the Enclosures Act. So when landlords started taking land back from us peasants, they divided the countryside up and began to own the land for the first time. And the way they demarked their ownership was often using hedgerows. So if you talk to Victorian ladies who love going out and painting landscapes, they would say that these lines of plants that were obviously man-made were ruining the landscape and putting a human footprint, if you like, across the countryside. They were unnatural. So if you talk to those people back then, and you talk to the peasants whose land had been taken away from them, they were really divisive. But of course, we now, as agriculture intensified and wildlife became less prevalent across the countryside, hedgerows started to become incredibly important as channels, if you like, for wildlife. So, the views of what hedgerows are, as or what they're like, has changed over the centuries, and now we value them highly, and we wouldn't, we indeed, as when hedgerows started to be taken out in the 70s and 80s and started to remove, there were lots of campaigns, about the removal of hedgerows, which would be ironic in history terms. So a hedgerow is really composed of shrubs and plants, fast-growing shrubs and plants, generally with thorns that keep us out and animals in. And the reason that farmers and landlords used principally hawthorn, which produced those really bright red berries that you see at this time of the year, hawthorn shrubs, and blackthorn, which produce sloes. So those principally were the two plants that were used to make up hedgerows, both of which you can take cuttings and very simply propagate through cuttings, so quite cheap to use, and they're both quite quick growing species. So, the hedges would grow up quickly. Of course, you now see, and particularly on parish boundaries, you see a lot more variety of hedges, and the best hedgerows for wildlife are the ones that have got lots of varieties. So I've got maybe wych elm, hazel, I've even seen oak, lots of dogwood, lots of other plants in there too. So the ones that are the best for wildlife are the ones with the most variety. That was a long answer to a short question. Sorry, my apologies about that.
I did suspect it might be not quite as simple as it seemed on the face of it. But interestingly, given that they are a man-made construct, what makes them such biodiverse entities? Is it just that they acted as a refuge at some point?
Yeah, well, I think, as I intimated, one of the things that has happened in the countryside, if you go to the state, I mean, the reason I'm interested in farming as well as conservation is because in the UK you have to understand farming if you're interested in wildlife, because there is pretty much no wilderness. Even at the top of the mount, the highest mountains in the UK, you will see sheep grazing. Basically, everywhere is affected by farmers that isn't under concrete, really. And what's happened in the countryside has been well documented over the last 60 or 70 years since the war. We asked farmers to increase food production, which they've done very efficiently. But that efficiency of production, of manufacturing of food in our countryside, has come at the expense of wildlife, because the efficiency basically has made food less available to wildlife and more available to us, principally. So hedgerows, as natural phenomena around the outside of fields that aren't really farmed, therefore they're left to grow up and they become harbours for wildlife. And because they have fruit in there and lots of variety, they can support lots of a variety of wildlife. So they've become increasingly important as a wildlife refuge over the last 40 or 50 years. And yes, as I said, they're full of, if you've got lots of different plants, you'll have lots of different insects, and you may have lots of different fruit, all of which, provide habitats and food for wildlife. And they provide cover. I mean, it's a pretty common sight for us to see a sparrowhawk dashing down at one side of a hedgerow, and all the little brown birds, the sparrows and so on, dashing for cover into the hedgerow where the sparrowhawk can't get.
You mentioned that people selected fast-growing species for their hedgerows. Did they also select them because they thought they could be used by humans for foraging?
I suspect absolutely not. One of the reasons. So I'm afraid I have a long answer for this one as well. I mean, they selected those plants because they were fast growing and because they had thorns, which would keep animals in. I'm possibly being slightly unfair when I say keep people out, but that was possibly a reason as well. If you ever come across a blackthorn hedge, you really want to walk around it if you possibly can, not go through it. So they are very spiky, but so I don't think they were planted with a reason to encourage foraging, but because one of the reasons that we started making sloe gin, that was how we got into business. As I said earlier on, the prevalence of sloes on the hedgerows on the farm where we were based made us think about making sloe gin and selling sloe gin to fund the conservation work. We've gone on to make lots of other things and gin itself now, but one of the things about sloe gin for people who live in the countryside is often a sort of feeling of a rite of passage when, to country life, as it were. When you make sloe gin, you go out and you forage for sloes, and then you go back and steep them in a bit of gin with sugar for a few months and open it at Christmas time. That's a kind of rite of passage into countryside life. And I think there's a reason for that, because of these hedgerows. When they were planted in the 16th and 17th century, they were very divisive. And so the people who were upset about the hedgerows could go out and in effect steal the fruit that was growing on the hedgerow and get it for free, because the landlord had taken the land away from them. So this was something they could get back and get for free. And so it became a bit of a rite of passage of, let's get one over on the landlord. Of course, one of the things about sloes is they look quite tasty. They look a bit like blueberries, but they taste nothing like blueberries. You generally only taste a raw sloe once or twice in your life, as they're very, very bitter. So gathering that fruit became, we can get this for free from the nasty landlord who's taken our land away from us. But actually, when you've tasted it, what the heck am I going to do with this? And of course, at that time, 16th, 17th century, gin was becoming a huge fashion when William and Mary came across the ocean and made us all Protestants, and they brought with them Jenever, which was a Dutch drink, which we kind of turned into what we now call gin. So there was lots of gin being made all over the countryside, and then lots of sloes suddenly appearing all over the countryside. Blackthorn was typically a hedgerow, a woodland edge plant, so people in the countryside would have known it. But suddenly, with all these hedgerows appearing everywhere, suddenly sloes became prevalent everywhere, and so suddenly sloe gin became a thing, and it became a thing that was a bit rebellious, and a way of showing your rebellion of going to get something for free from the landlord who'd taken your land away. That was another long answer to a short question. My apologies.
No, it's great. So, in terms of using hedgerows for foraging on a farm that's otherwise presumably used in a productive way, is it important to do that, to kind of give them a value that is above and beyond just a conservation tool?
Well, yeah, I think it's, making anything at home yourself. And I think, even, I make gin and I make sloe gin and, lots of other products. But I'd still say making it yourself, there's something special about that. And it always kind of tastes better, made when you've put some effort and time and love into a product. So, I'm not sure of the intrinsic value for wildlife of harvesting sloes. I don't think is that important, but I think it's good for the soul, one's own soul. So yeah, I don't think it particularly helps wildlife. And in some cases, you might be competing for food with the wildlife. So whatever I'd say when anyone goes out foraging, I'd always say, don't pick everything, leave some for wildlife. As I said at the beginning, sloes aren't really that valuable to the fruit themselves, aren't really that valuable to most wildlife species, because of the stone in the centre of the fruit and because of the bitterness. So they often do rot on the hedge if they're not picked. So but if you're picking elderberries or blackberries, I always think, leave some for the wildlife species.
So apart from the berries, is there anything else that we can forage from hedgerows?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked about the classic berries of blackberries and sloes and elderberries, but rose hips are good. They are a fruit, a bright orange, sort of slightly rugby ball shaped fruit of the dog rose, Rosa canina. They are a rich source of vitamin C, and rose hip syrup is a nice thing to produce and use to sweeten things. It's got a nice sort of hibiscus, slightly citrusy flavour. We use nettle leaves in our gin. Nettle leaves have kind of herbally grassy kind of almost bay-like taste, slightly spinachy as well, I think, when they're dried. So we often forage for nettles. Nettles, again, there are lots of nettles out in the countryside, which is a good thing because they support a lot of butterflies. So a lot of butterflies, like peacocks and tortoiseshells, lay their eggs on nettles. So again, if you're going to take nettles, don't take them all. Regardless of that, we only ever pick the tops of the nettles, which you can do if you're really brave with your bare hands. I do that. You do get a bit tingly, but the nettle tops in the spring and the late autumn come off quite easily without doing much stinging. So we use nettle leaves. Another classic, is elderflower. So elderberries this time of the year, elderflower in sort of May, June time. So they're, a classic thing to forage with a really kind of floral taste with slight apple. I always kind of think they have a slight appley fruit pear-like taste as well. So making elderflower cordial is a classic thing to do and forage for. Actually, we made this year, which genuinely were delicious, elderflower fritters. I think there is a recipe for that on our website, but they were. I didn't want more than two, but they were really interesting flavoured, kind of fritters. And if you can picture an elderflower, they're umbilical-like, so they've got lots of arms sticking out. So you can pick off an elderflower head, and it's effectively a handle to dip into the batter. So that was quite an experience and quite a nice thing to do. So elderflowers are a great thing to forage.
And you've launched National Hedgerow Day. This episode is going out just after it, but presumably this is a good time to be going out and foraging from the hedgerows.
This is the classic time of year. I mean, it's the sort of original harvest time, and there's harvest festivals going on. So it is the classic time of the year when nature provides lots of fruit. So we've mentioned blackberries and sloes. They're all out there now, and rose hips. Elderflower, obviously back in May, June, but elderberries right now. So this is the classic time when, there's still a lot of wildlife around, as well as forageable goods, as it were. And it's now the heat of the summer has gone. It's I love this time of year, going out and looking for stuff, foraging the wildlife that's there.
And what sort of birds are we likely to find in hedgerows?
Well, the classic hedgerow bird would be something like a yellowhammer. There won't be much singing. Singing happens in earlier in the year, but so you're not going to hear a great deal of bird song now. But yellowhammer is a classic hedgerow bird. Bullfinches too, which are absolute favourites. So the male bullfinch is really boldly pink with a lovely black head and grey back. So bullfinches and yellowhammers, and then lots of what bird watchers call LBJs, little brown jobs, sort of sparrows, tree sparrows and hedge sparrows, would be really common sight. And I mentioned earlier the sparrowhawk, which a lot of people kind of worry about all the little birds, but sparrowhawk's just an important part of our wildlife, and we'll often see sparrowhawks touring down, flying quietly down a hedgerow, kind of looking for food themselves.
You mentioned, obviously, I think hedgerows have had a bit of a checkered past. They've kind of come and gone in terms of popularity and in physical presence. Do they still need our help in terms of preservation?
Yeah, I think, the more people are aware, the more people will question things about what happens in the countryside and take an interest. Over the last few years, and last 20 odd years, government have been trying to help farmers to help manage the hedgerows better. But the more people go out and see the hedgerows and they witness the wildlife, and I think the lockdown has been a really important thing in people's understanding and enjoyment of the countryside. When it's life has allowed us to go out there. If you're not working, if you're furloughed, people have gone out and into the hedgerows and into the countryside, of which hedgerows are a big part. And awareness of what goes on in the countryside is really important, and developing a love for wildlife is really important for its survival, because if we all show our interest, the government will respond. If people are interested in those things, then the government will respond by making sure that those, it's harder to remove hedgerows or damage hedgerows. I mean, one of the big problems for hedgerows is mismanagement. They need management. They do, they ultimately do need management of some kind, and farmers often don't have the time or the money, but also often the inclination to manage hedgerows well, and that's so it's important for all of us to understand and to help kind of help their popularity and help their maintenance ultimately.
Yeah. And if we wanted to establish a new hedge, I think there are schemes that will offer.
There definitely are. I mean, for farmers and landowners, there are schemes out there that help pay for planting of hedgerows, and there's lots of advice out there online as well as to how to plant them. The real if people are going to plant hedgerows, the main thing is variety of plants. Yes, your mainstays will be your blackthorn and your hawthorn, but putting a bit of holly or putting a bit of dogwood or wych elm or birch, these to add a variety. The more variety of plants there will be, the more variety of fruit, the more variety of insects that will be associated with those plants, the better, or the more food for the ecosystem.
And if we did plant one, how long realistically, given that we had good conditions, how long roughly would it take before you could actually forage from it?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. Well, if you're foraging for nettles, they come pretty quickly, as we all know. But if you're looking for fruit from the blackthorn, or you're looking for dog rose, I mean, rose hips will come reasonably quickly in probably 2 or 3 years. But with sloes, it's probably more like 3 or 4 plus. So it is a long-term investment. You're not going to get much return in the first few years, I'm afraid. So yeah, like a lot of things in wildlife, that you can do these things, but it takes it's a long-term project.
That's not too bad, actually. I thought it would be longer.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If that's probably with good growing conditions. So you certainly, to get a good crop of sloes, to make a good amount of sloe gin, you probably are talking 10 years, but it's probably not much longer than that.
No. So for your National Hedgerow Day, what are you encouraging people to do?
So we've put together a checklist of your common hedgerow sites for people to tick off and learn. Really, it's principally, we're starting pretty small. We're a fairly small business, but with a passionate centre and interest in hedgerows, and we're just wanting to, I suppose, share the love and understanding of those habitats. So yes, we've got a downloadable form on our website, sloemotiondistillery.com, and it just shares a bit of information, a bit of background about lots of different plant species, lots of different wildlife species, I should say, butterflies, moths, and mammals, and so on. Of course, the humble hedgehog. So people can tick off and learn about what's out there and develop a love. And of course, wildlife is an important part of our business, in the centre of our business in a way, and we get inspiration from those hedgerows. But we are all about, we make a product, and we are trying to sell more products. But if you sign up for the download the tick list, you get entered into a prize draw for winning a bottle of our hedgerow gin. So we'd certainly encourage everyone to get involved and get out there and learn and understand what's going on out there, as well as trying a bit of sloe gin or gin as well. Or of course, we all have to drink responsibly. This it's all about sharing information and enjoyment of hedgerows. One thing I will say for people out there, this is one of my taglines that I talk about often when I'm talking to people about hedgerows, and particularly sloe gin. Sloes, blackthorn, are almost entirely pollinated by moths, and often moths are a bit divisive, and they can be a bit of a pain if they come into your house, but they are hugely important in the environment, and the unsung heroes of the pollination world. All the bees and butterflies always get the plaudits, but moths are hugely important, and if you love sloe gin, you have to love moths, because without moths there would be no sloes. So that's my parting shot for sloes and sloe gin, that moths are to be encouraged at every opportunity if you want to drink more sloe gin.
Brilliant. So I know it's weird at the moment, but do you have open days at all? Are you planning anything for next year?
We're doing quite a few virtual tastings, and we do a bit of virtual walking down the hedgerows. There's quite a few videos and things of that nature on our website. At the moment, we aren't doing anything, inevitably, but we do hope to open the distillery back up, hopefully next year, to do, a tour of the distillery, come and look at our still, come and look at how we make gin, but also, maybe then come for a tour down the hedgerows that surround us here at Green Farm, and kind of learn a bit about the wildlife that lives there. So not at this moment in time, but do look on our website, because there are lots of films that talk about the hedges and how we use them.
The link to the Sloemotion website is, of course, in the show notes. If this episode has put you in the mood for sloe gin and you don't want to wait until Christmas for your own batch, you can always buy some from the website or find your local stockist. And if you'd like to find out more about hedgerows, I'm reading a great book at the moment called The Natural History of the Hedgerow by John Wright. Thanks to Joff for taking part in the interview, and thanks very much to you two for listening. Here's Dr. Ian Bedford talking about fruit flies.
When little black flies come into our homes and begin flying around a fruit bowl, there'll almost certainly be a common fruit fly that's been attracted to a piece of fruit that's in the initial stages of rotting. Since fruit flies use their powerful olfactory senses to detect and follow the scent of fermentation juices that ooze from overripe fruit, and on which they feed. And whilst there, they'll mate and lay eggs, which will hatch the following day into little maggots that flourish within the fruit's decaying flesh, rapidly maturing, pupating, and then emerging as another generation of fruit flies in as little as 10 days. But as annoying as fruit flies might be in the home, they're actually a natural indicator that it's time to sort out the old fruit and perhaps take it to the compost bin, where the fly's maggots can get on with their invaluable job of recycling. Interestingly though, the common fruit fly currently has another important role to play, a role that's of great value to us in helping us understand biotic systems and interactions. Since its rapid life cycle, ease of maintenance within a science lab, and the recent unravelling of its complete genome sequence have enabled it to become one of the world's most widely used organisms within genetic and biological research. And the fact that we share 40% of our genes with the common fruit fly allows it to be used as a genetic model for researching human diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and in the quest to understand the mechanisms of ageing, drug resistance, diabetes and cancer. So the next time fruit flies are being a bit of a nuisance in the home, it's worth sparing a thought for how they're helping us understand and improve on our health and well-being, before swatting them with a tea towel.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.